Commander Lee Hana adjusted her collar one last time as she walked into the massive chamber. The Galactic Council Hall stretched out before her like a small city, filled with hundreds of alien species from across the known universe. Some had tentacles instead of arms, others floated in energy bubbles, and a few looked like walking crystals that sparkled under the artificial lights. Her heart pounded, but her face remained calm. This was the most important speech any human had ever given, and possibly the last one these aliens would ever hear from her kind. Behind her, Captain Kim Tae stood with his arms crossed, his military bearing evident even in civilian clothes. Engineer Park Min-ho fidgeted with a small device in his pocket, probably some gadget he had been tinkering with during the long journey here. The three humans looked incredibly small in this vast space, filled with beings who considered themselves the masters of the galaxy. Some of these species had been traveling between stars when Earth was still covered in ice. Others had built cities that floated in the hearts of stars themselves. To them, humans were newcomers who had only recently learned to leave their home planet. Hana cleared her throat and activated the translation matrix that would carry her words to every corner of the chamber. The chatter and alien sounds gradually died down as thousands of eyes, sensors, and other detection organs focused on her. The Human Federation formally withdraws from galactic civilization, she announced, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was saying. Effective immediately, all human personnel will cease operations and return to Earth. The reaction was immediate, but not what she had expected. Most of the aliens barely seemed to care. A few looked mildly annoyed, like someone had just told them their favorite restaurant was closing for renovations. The Vorton representative, a tall being with skin like polished metal, didn't even bother to look up from the glowing data pad in his hands. "Very well," the Vorton said in a bored tone. "We trust the maintenance contracts will be transferred smoothly to local species." That single sentence hit Hana like a physical blow. 300 years. 3 centuries of human blood, sweat, and tears keeping this galactic civilization running. Humans had died in the depths of space, fixing broken hyperspace gates. They had spent lifetimes maintaining ancient alien technology that even its creators no longer understood. They had prevented wars by keeping communication networks operational and had saved countless lives by maintaining life support systems on distant colonies. And this was how it ended. Not with gratitude or even curiosity about why humanity was leaving. Just a casual assumption that someone else would pick up the slack, like humans were nothing more than janitors who could be easily replaced. Hana felt her jaw muscles tighten as anger flared in her chest. Captain Kim Tae noticed and placed a gentle hand on her shoulder, reminding her to stay professional. Park Min-ho stopped fidgeting and looked up at the sea of indifferent alien faces with something close to disgust. The commander had prepared a longer speech explaining humanity's contributions and their reasons for leaving. She had planned to give these species one last chance to understand what they were losing. But looking at their dismissive attitudes and complete lack of interest, she realized it would be pointless. Within 6 hours of her announcement, human ships across the galaxy received their orders. The exodus began immediately, silent and efficient, just like everything else humans did. The first sign of trouble appeared exactly 183 days after the last human transport ship disappeared into hyperspace. If Station Master Yoon Ji-ho had still been manning his post at Navigation Hub 7, he would have spotted the anomaly immediately. The hyperspace beacon that guided ships through the treacherous Vortex Nebula flickered for just 2 microseconds longer than it should have. 2 microseconds, a blink of an eye that most species couldn't even detect. But Yoon Ji-ho had possessed an almost supernatural ability to sense when something was wrong with the navigation network. He used to joke that he could feel the pulse of hyperspace itself, like a doctor listening to a patient's heartbeat. Now, with no human ears to hear it, that heartbeat was developing an irregular rhythm. Captain Vex Talar of the Zentari merchant fleet was the first to file a complaint. His cargo hauler, loaded with precious metals from the outer rim, had arrived at Kepler Station nearly 4 minutes behind schedule. 4 minutes didn't sound like much, but in galactic commerce, timing was everything. Cargo ships followed precise schedules that had been calculated down to the second, and even small delays could cascade into massive problems across the supply chain. Navigation systems are malfunctioning, Vextala reported to the station authorities. My jump calculations were perfect, but something threw us off course. The station's alien technicians ran diagnostics on the hyperspace beacons and found nothing wrong. According to their instruments, everything was functioning within normal parameters. They dismissed the captain's complaint as pilot error and sent him on his way. But deep in the network's quantum processors, tiny errors were accumulating like dust in the corners of an abandoned house. Meanwhile, on the industrial powerhouse world of Kepler 442b, something far more serious was beginning to unfold. The planet's massive fusion reactors had been humanity's greatest gift to galactic civilization. These weren't just power plants, they were works of art, engineered with a precision that bordered on the miraculous. Each reactor generated enough energy to power entire star systems, and they had run without a single major incident for over 60 years. The Zentari engineers who had taken over the facilities were proud of their technical expertise. They had advanced degrees from the most prestigious universities in the galaxy and had studied fusion technology for centuries. When the first minor fluctuation appeared in Reactor Complex 7, they barely gave it a second thought. Probably just a sensor glitch, Chief Engineer Kolveth announced during the morning briefing. These old systems sometimes throw false readings, but it wasn't a sensor glitch. For 15 years, human technician Kang Sora had made her rounds through that reactor complex every single day. She would walk the maintenance corridors with a small toolkit and an intuitive understanding of the machinery that the alien engineers found baffling. While they relied on computer readouts and technical manuals, Sora would place her hand on the reactor housing and listen to the subtle vibrations that told her everything she needed to know. The Zentari engineers never understood why she made those tiny adjustments to the magnetic containment fields. The changes were so small, they barely registered on their instruments, yet Sora would spend hours fine-tuning systems that appeared to be running perfectly. When they asked her about it, she would just smile and say she was keeping things balanced. Now, without Sora's gentle touch, the reactors were slowly drifting out of alignment. The magnetic fields that contained the fusion reaction were shifting by fractions of a degree, creating instabilities that grew stronger with each passing day. The crack appeared on a Tuesday morning, Galactic Standard Time, stretching across the surface of humanity's greatest engineering marvel. The Dyson sphere around Proxima Centauri had been collecting stellar energy for over 2 million years, its massive panels drinking in the star's radiation and converting it into power that fed half the galaxy. It was supposed to be indestructible, built from materials that could withstand the heat of a dying star and the cold of deep space. But there it was, a hairline fracture no wider than a human finger, running along a panel section 4847,293. Most observers, it looked insignificant, like a scratch on a window. The automated repair systems registered the anomaly, but classified it as a minor cosmetic issue, not worth immediate attention. Chief Engineer Ryu Daehyun would have seen it differently. Every month for the past 12 years, he had piloted his small maintenance craft around the sphere's enormous circumference, his trained eyes scanning for the smallest signs of stress or wear. Daehyun had an almost mystical ability to read the language of metal and energy. He could tell just by looking at a panel whether it was happy or struggling, whether the materials were aging gracefully or preparing to fail catastrophically. Hey. Crack wasn't just a crack to Daehyun. It was the sphere's way of crying for help, a distress signal that only human engineers seemed capable of understanding. Now, with no one to hear its plea, the fracture began to spread, growing longer and deeper with each pulse of stellar radiation that hammered against the weakening structure. Thousands of light-years away, the ringworld of Kepler 438c was experiencing its own crisis. The massive orbital habitat was home to 47 billion beings from dozens of different species, all living comfortably on a structure that encircled its star like a gigantic bracelet. The ring was so vast that most residents forgot they were living on an artificial world at all. Mountains, oceans, and continents had been carefully crafted along its inner surface, creating what appeared to be a natural planet stretched into an impossible shape. The gravitational stabilizers that kept the ring in perfect orbit were beginning to fail. At first, the changes were so subtle that only the most sensitive instruments could detect them. A wobble of less than a millimeter, a tiny deviation in the ring's rotation that seemed completely harmless. The alien engineers monitoring the system noted the anomaly in their reports, but classified it as normal operational variance. They had no idea that human physicist Dr. Kim Young-ho had spent 3 decades making microscopic adjustments to those stabilizers. Every week he would recalibrate the gravitational field generators, compensating for the subtle changes in stellar wind, cosmic radiation, and the gravitational pull of nearby planets. His adjustments were so small that the alien monitoring systems couldn't even measure them, yet they were absolutely critical for keeping the ring stable. Without Young-ho's careful touch, the ring was slowly beginning to drift out of its perfect orbital path. The wobble was growing exponentially, doubling in magnitude every few days. Soon the 47 billion residents would begin to notice unusual weather patterns as the ring's rotation created artificial storms and temperature fluctuations. But the most catastrophic failure was happening in the realm of communication itself. Dr. Osujin had spent her entire career working on what she modestly called network maintenance. The aliens had always assumed she was just a technician, someone who replaced broken components and ran routine diagnostics on the galaxy's quantum communication array. The emergency session of the Galactic Council lasted 14 straight hours, something that hadn't happened in over 3,000 years. Council Arbiter Velthanis, a being whose crystalline form had witnessed the rise and fall of countless civilizations, found himself in the unprecedented position of admitting that the Council had made a terrible mistake. The infrastructure failures are accelerating beyond our ability to contain them, he announced to the assembled representatives, his voice carrying the weight of barely controlled panic. We have lost contact with 47 star systems in the past week alone. The hyperspace network is collapsing, and our finest engineers cannot determine why. The Vorthan representative, who had so casually dismissed humanity's departure now, sat rigid in his chair, his metallic skin dulled with what could only be described as fear. Surely this is coincidence, he insisted, though his voice lacked conviction. The departure of a few maintenance workers cannot be responsible for galaxy-wide system failures, but Velthanis had lived long enough to recognize patterns that others missed. The timing was too perfect, the scope too vast to be mere coincidence. With growing desperation, he turned to his personal aide, a young Altarian whose tentacles were trembling with nervousness. "Find the humans," he commanded, his crystalline voice cutting through the chamber's nervous chatter. "Send our fastest ships to every corner of known space. Offer them reasonable compensation for their return. Offer them whatever they want." The search began immediately, with the most advanced scout ships in the galaxy racing toward every world where humans had once worked. What they found defied their understanding of logistics and planning. Every single human facility had been evacuated with military precision, not just abandoned, but completely stripped clean of everything useful. On the mining world of Xerion, Prima, the search team found buildings that looked like empty shells. Every piece of equipment, every computer terminal, every tool had been removed. Even the furniture was gone, leaving only empty rooms that echoed with the footsteps of confused alien investigators. The facility's power systems had been methodically shut down, with backup batteries drained and energy cells removed. The most disturbing discovery came from the Galactic Hub, the administrative center of interstellar civilization. The massive space station had been humanity's unofficial headquarters for over 2 centuries, housing thousands of human engineers, technicians, and administrators. Now it stood virtually empty, its corridors eerily quiet. In the main engineering bay, where Supervisor Cho Hanul had overseen the maintenance of critical systems for 15 years, the search team found a scene that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. Every console had been wiped clean, every backup drive removed. The room's massive holographic displays, which had once shown real-time data from across the galaxy, now showed only error messages and system failures. But on the supervisor's desk, held down by a simple paperweight, was a single piece of paper with a handwritten message. You never asked how it really worked. The simplicity of those 7 words sent chills through every member of the search team. They had always assumed that human technology was primitive, that their methods were crude, approximations of proper engineering. The idea that there might be depth and complexity hidden beneath humanity's humble exterior had never occurred to them. Desperate to understand what they had lost, the Zentari Empire dispatched their most brilliant scientists to examine the abandoned human equipment. Professor Zektoris, holder of 17 advanced degrees in theoretical physics, led a team of experts to analyze devices that humans had left behind in their haste to evacuate. What they found challenged everything they thought they knew about the universe. The first ship to disappear was the merchant vessel Prosperity's Edge, carrying a cargo of rare minerals from the Outer Rim territories. Captain Zekvarian had made the same hyperspace jump hundreds of times before, using a route that was considered one of the safest in the galaxy. His navigation computer calculated the jump with mathematical precision, accounting for gravitational fields, stellar drift, and cosmic radiation patterns. But when the Prosperity's Edge emerged from hyperspace, nothing looked familiar. The stars were wrong, the constellations alien, and the ship's sensors couldn't detect any known navigation beacons. Captain Zekvarian and his crew found themselves lost in a region of space that didn't appear on any star chart, with fuel running, dangerously low and no idea how to get home. Within days, similar reports began flooding in from across the galaxy. Ships that had been making routine cargo runs for decades suddenly found themselves thrown off course by thousands of light years. Some crews were lucky enough to find their way back to known space after weeks of desperate searching. Others simply vanished, their fate unknown. The hyperspace network that had connected galactic civilization for millennia was falling apart. What had once been reliable highways through folded space-time were now treacherous paths that led nowhere. Navigation computers that had worked flawlessly for centuries began producing calculations that made no sense, sending ships into regions where the laws of physics seemed to work differently. Captain Narwubin would have prevented most of these disasters. For 37 years, he had maintained the hyperspace jump points along the critical trade routes between the core worlds and the industrial sectors. Every month, he would pilot his specialized maintenance craft to each jump point, making tiny adjustments to the quantum field generators that kept the space-time corridors stable. To other species, Narwubin's work looked like routine maintenance. He would spend hours staring at readouts that showed seemingly normal parameters, then make adjustments so small they barely registered on the monitoring equipment. When younger human engineers asked him how he knew what to change, he would tap his temple and say, "You have to feel the flow of space-time itself." The alien engineers who took over his duties after humanity's departure couldn't understand what he meant. They saw numbers on screens and followed technical manuals, but they lacked the intuitive sense that had allowed Narwubin to keep the hyperspace network running smoothly. Without his constant adjustments, the quantum fields began to drift, creating instabilities that grew worse with each passing day. On the manufacturing world of Titan IX, an even more catastrophic failure was unfolding. The planet's stellar forge was one of the most impressive technological achievements in galactic history, a massive facility that could create exotic materials by manipulating matter at the subatomic level. The forge drew power directly from the system's sun, using controlled fusion reactions to generate temperatures that exceeded those found in the cores of stars. For decades, the forge had operated without a single major incident, producing the advanced materials needed for galactic construction projects. Starship hulls, space station frameworks, and planetary shield generators all relied on materials that could only be created in the forge's incredible heat and pressure. Dr. Bayek Sohi had been the forge's chief physicist, though her job title never reflected the true scope of her responsibilities. While the alien technicians focused on operating procedures and safety protocols, Sohi spent her days monitoring the exotic matter containment systems that kept the forge from destroying itself. The largest armada in galactic history assembled. At the edge of known space, a desperate collection of ships from every major civilization. Fleet Admiral Kexavorian, a veteran commander who had led successful campaigns against space pirates and rogue AI systems, now found himself tasked with the most important mission of his long career: finding humanity and convincing them to return. His flagship, the mighty Concordance, was surrounded by over 3,000 vessels representing 47 different species. There were sleek Vorton destroyers with their mirror-bright hulls, massive Zentari cargo haulers loaded with tribute offerings, and even the mysterious crystalline ships of the Elder Consortium, being so ancient they rarely involved themselves in galactic affairs. The search had been going on for months, following faint energy traces that human ships had left behind during their exodus. These signatures were unlike anything the alien scientists had seen before, suggesting that humanity possessed propulsion technology far more advanced than anyone had realized. The trails led away from the galactic core, toward the outer rim where stars became sparse, and the darkness between them stretched for unimaginable distances. "They're heading toward the Magellanic Clouds," reported Chief Navigator Veltorin, his tentacles dancing across holographic star charts. "But these energy signatures are getting weaker. It's like they're deliberately trying to hide their path." Admiral Kexavorian studied the data with growing frustration. Every time his fleet thought they were closing in on humanity's trail, the signatures would fade or split into multiple paths that led nowhere. It was becoming clear that the humans hadn't just left randomly. They had planned their departure with the same precision they had once applied to maintaining galactic infrastructure. The breakthrough came when they discovered the first beacon. It was a small, unremarkable device floating in the void between star systems, broadcasting on frequencies that most species couldn't even detect. Only the Elder Consortium's sensitive equipment picked up the signal, and even then, it took weeks to decode the message. When they finally cracked the transmission, the entire fleet fell silent. The voice that spoke was human, but it carried an authority and dignity that none of the alien commanders had ever associated with humanity before. Admiral Han Sungmin, former coordinator of human operations in the Outer Rim, appeared on their screens wearing the dress uniform of a species that the galaxy had dismissed as maintenance workers. "For 3 centuries we offered partnership," Sungmin's recorded voice said, his words measured and calm. "You demanded servants. We maintained your reality while you called us primitive. Now fix it yourselves." The message was only 30 seconds long, but its impact on the search fleet was devastating. For the first time, many of the alien crews began to understand that humanity's departure wasn't just about hurt feelings or wounded pride. It was about fundamental respect, about being seen as equals rather than useful tools. But the beacon contained more than just words. Hidden within its data core were star charts, showing humanity's path beyond the galactic rim, into regions of space that even the eldest civilizations had never explored. The charts revealed a journey that defied everything the aliens thought. They knew about interstellar travel. Humanity had somehow managed to cross the vast emptiness between galaxies, venturing into the cosmic void where no stars burned and no planets existed. It was a journey that should have been impossible with any known technology, yet the evidence was undeniable. The humans had gone where no other species had dared to go. "They're not just hiding from us," whispered Chief Science Officer Kelthara, her usually confident voice shaking. "They're exploring regions of space we never even imagined could be reached." The first temporal anomaly struck without warning on the research station orbiting Kepler 186f. Dr. Yextorin was conducting routine experiments in his laboratory when he noticed something impossible happening to his chronometer. The device, which had kept perfect time for over a century, suddenly began racing forward at an incredible speed. Within minutes, the chronometer had advanced by 3 days, then a week, then a month. Dr. Yextorin watched in horror as his reflection in the laboratory mirror began to age rapidly. His fur turned grey, then white, and deep wrinkles appeared on his face as decades passed in mere moments. By the time the effect finally stopped, he had aged 47 years in less than 10 minutes. The temporal distortion didn't affect the entire station equally. Some sections experienced time normally, while others were frozen in what scientists would later call temporal amber. In the station's cafeteria, a cup of coffee hung suspended in mid-air, its contents frozen mid-pour, while the being who had dropped it stood motionless like a statue. Human chronometer technician Lee Ji-won had spent 12 years maintaining the temporal stabilization equipment in this sector of space. To the alien researchers, her work had seemed mundane and unimportant. She would arrive at each facility with a toolkit full of devices that looked primitive compared to their advanced technology, making adjustments to equipment that appeared to be functioning perfectly. "Why does she keep calibrating systems that are already working?" the station commander had once asked his science officer. "These humans seem obsessed with fixing things that aren't broken." Now they understood that Ji-won hadn't been fixing broken equipment. She had been preventing time itself from breaking down. The temporal stabilizers that she maintained weren't just measuring time. They were actively keeping it flowing at a consistent rate across vast regions of space. Without her constant adjustments, the fabric of space-time was beginning to unravel. Similar temporal disasters began occurring throughout the galaxy. On the resort world of Atlantica, tourists found themselves trapped in time loops, reliving the same hour over and over again. The planet's famous crystal beaches, where families had vacationed for generations, became a nightmarish maze where cause and effect no longer followed logical patterns. But the temporal anomalies were only the beginning of a much larger catastrophe. Deep in the industrial sectors of the galaxy, something far more fundamental was starting to fail. The strong nuclear force, one of the four basic forces that held the universe together, was beginning to weaken in certain regions of space. Dr. Shin Mi-young had spent her entire career working with what she modestly called field stabilization equipment. The alien scientists who worked alongside her had always assumed she was maintaining simple force field generators, the kind used to contain dangerous experiments or create protective barriers around sensitive equipment. They had no idea that her simple field generators were actually sophisticated devices designed to keep the strong nuclear force properly calibrated across enormous volumes of space. The strong nuclear force is what holds the protons and neutrons together inside every atomic nucleus. If it becomes too weak, atoms literally fall apart. If it becomes too strong, matter collapses into ultra-dense forms that can't support normal chemistry or physics. Mi-young had discovered early in her career that the strong nuclear force wasn't perfectly uniform throughout the galaxy. Cosmic radiation, gravitational fields from massive stars, and the residual effects of ancient supernovas all created tiny variations in how strongly the nuclear force operated in different regions. These variations were so small that most species couldn't even detect them, but over time they could accumulate into serious problems. For 23 years, Mi-young had traveled from system to system, making microscopic adjustments to keep the nuclear force balanced. Her work required an intuitive understanding of quantum mechanics that even the most advanced alien physicists found difficult to comprehend. The transmission came from everywhere and nowhere at once. Every functioning communication device in the galaxy suddenly activated simultaneously, from the massive broadcast arrays on capital worlds to the simple personal communicators carried by individual beings. Even equipment that had been offline for months mysteriously powered itself up to receive the message. Commander Im Dong-hyuk's face appeared on billions of screens across the dying galaxy. His features showed the wear of someone who had spent decades making impossible decisions, but his eyes held a calm certainty that commanded immediate attention. Behind him, the bridge of his ship defied every known law of physics and engineering. Human technicians moved with fluid precision around devices that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions at once. Their hands passed through what looked like solid matter, manipulating controls that appeared to be made of crystallized light and folded space. The very air around them shimmered with energy patterns that hurt to look at directly, as if reality itself was being gently reshaped by their touch. "We are the universe's engineers," Dong-hyuk began, his voice carrying the weight of absolute truth. "Born from cosmic necessity, blessed with the ability to perceive what you cannot. We offered to teach you, to share the burden of maintaining reality itself. You preferred to see us as your servants." The words hit like physical blows across the galaxy. In the Galactic Council chambers, representatives who had spent centuries dismissing humanity as primitive now watched in stunned silence as the truth of their situation became undeniable. The beings who they had treated as maintenance workers were revealing themselves as masters of forces that the greatest alien scientists couldn't even comprehend. Through the transmission, viewers could see other human ships hanging in impossible formations around Dongyuk's vessel. The craft moved in patterns that violated every principle of physics, sliding through space-time as if the normal barriers between dimensions were merely suggestions they chose to ignore. Some ships appeared to be occupying the same space while remaining somehow separate, their hulls flickering between different states of existence. "Your galaxy is dying because you never learned to maintain what you used," Dongyuk continued, his tone neither angry nor accusatory, but filled with the sadness of someone watching a preventable tragedy unfold. "But we remember what it was like when we were young and foolish too." Behind him, a human engineer who looked barely old enough to be out of school was casually adjusting what appeared to be a miniature star contained within a transparent sphere. The stellar object responded to her touch like a pet, brightening and dimming according to her needs. She was using it to power calculations that would have required the entire computational resources of most alien civilizations. The revelation was devastating for species that had built their entire identity around their supposed technological superiority. The Zentari, who had considered themselves the galaxy's premier engineers, realized they had been like children playing with blocks while adults built cathedrals around them. The Vorthans, whose mathematical prowess was legendary, understood. They had been solving simple addition problems, while humans balanced equations that described the fundamental structure of reality itself. "The choice is yours," Dongyuk said, his weathered face showing genuine compassion for the beings who had dismissed his people for so long. "Accept us as equals and learn, or face extinction with your pride intact." The transmission showed glimpses of human technology that redefined what was possible. Massive structures that existed partially outside normal space-time, powered by forces that seemed to be drawn from the quantum foam itself. Gardens where flowers bloomed in vacuum, sustained by carefully maintained pockets of altered physics. Cities that moved through dimensions like ships sailing across an ocean, their inhabitants living in harmony with principles of reality that other species had never imagined. The message ended as abruptly as it had begun, leaving the galaxy in absolute silence. No demands, no ultimatums, no threats of retaliation, just a simple choice offered with the patience of beings who understood that pride was often the last thing a civilization was willing to sacrifice, even when facing extinction.